the newsagents.
This is the government that spent £400 million of taxpayers' money on a Rwanda scheme, yet can't deport a single person. And this is the government that waged a week-long war on the Greek Prime Minister for reasons known only to themselves. And suddenly are reminded that, of course, this farce of a government could lose the people it was planning to remove. But he didn't answer the question, so I'll ask him again. Where are the 4,250 people that the government has lost? Where are they?
That was Keir Starmer in the Commons asking Rishi Sunak about his Rwanda plan, and most specifically about migrants who had literally gone missing. A question that Rishi Sunak faced 4 times and couldn't answer.
And since we sat and recorded 24 hours ago, 3 others have gone missing. 2 Conservative Party vice chairmen and 1 junior member of the business department, because they don't like Rishi Sunak's policy either on Rwanda. It's probably going to get through, but at a hefty cost of Rishi Sunak's authority and credibility. Welcome to the newsagents. It's John.
It's Emily.
It's Lewis.
And I'm going to say that that was probably one of the strongest Prime Minister's Questions performance from Keir Starmer that we've seen, certainly for a long time, because he had the world in front of him in terms of a Rwanda policy that Rishi Sunak calls a plan, which is kind of falling apart in front of his eyes. As discussed, he's already had resignations, he's got rebellions on his hand. We don't know how many will actually rebel when the vote goes through this evening, but it's all adding up to this impression of a man who leads his party who doesn't quite know where his people are. And at the moment, it's very easy pickings for Keir Starmer just to say, even away from the Rwanda policy, you're losing migrants. How can you pretend to have a plan when you're actually losing people in this country? Something that Rishi Sunak didn't even attempt to address.
The other thing that Keir Starmer did well today was that he was actually quite funny.
Yeah.
And he kept the lines short. They weren't lost in a whole load of peripheral waffle. And of course, when you get your backbenchers laughing at the opposition, it raises morale. And there was one bit I thought which was good, where he was attacking the policy and saying, look, Rishi Sunak, you never really believed in this policy anyway of the Rwanda deportations when you were Chancellor of the Exchequer. Let's just have a listen.
The ridiculous thing is, we know the Prime Minister himself doesn't even believe in this Rwanda gimmick. He had to be talked out of scrapping the whole thing. He didn't want to fund it. He didn't think it would work. When he sees his party tearing itself apart, hundreds of bald men scrapping over a single broken comb, doesn't he wish he'd had the courage to stick to his guns?
La cucaracha, la cucaracha. You know that is where it comes from.
Go on.
What, the joke?
Yeah,
Go on.
Cuando uno quiere uno y la una no la quiere, es lo mismo que si un calvo en la calle encuentre peine.
Sorry, am I still asleep? Like, what's actually going on?
That is the lyric. It's like seeing 2 bald men fighting over a comb.
Well, that was lovely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Well,
Well
I
done.
had to
I
get
tell
it
you
in
what,
because
I
I was
think-
banned from singing at Christmas.
I see, right, okay.
I
so
think
only-
the newsagents has risen to a whole new level with that intervention from Emily Maitlis.
Las noticias, agencias, something like that. That's us anyway. Look, think about that, John. You're right. Not only was Starmer funny, the point was he anchored his questions around a real fallibility and weak point for Sunak, which is something actually that was adverted to and referred to yesterday by Jenrick, which is this question of asylum seekers absconding. So Starmer's question was about the fact that the government has admitted that 85% of the total number of people that they had earmarked to be sent to Rwanda have mysteriously disappeared. Now, why would they do that? Well, they might think that if their asylum application was likely to be rejected, they can just disappear into total anonymity and work on the black market and hopefully stay for such time that eventually they can settle either legitimately or illegitimately. And what did Jenrick mention yesterday? He mentioned exactly that point. The centre of his critique was to say that if you do not reduce the length of time that someone can stay before they're deported to Rwanda, i.e. reduce the status of the legal challenge that they can bring, then they will just abscond. They will just disappear. So what Starmer was doing was effectively goading Sunak's critics, the rebels, those who rebelled on the amendments last night, the 50, 60 or so Conservative MPs, saying, have the courage of your convictions. You know this isn't going to work in the current form. You may not care about international law like I do, but stick to your guns and rebel. They probably won't do it anyway, but nonetheless, that's why it was an effective charge.
That's such a good point. It is a horseshoe, essentially, whereby Keir Starmer will end up voting against the bill alongside people like Robert Jenrick and Simon Clarke, who we had on. And that's a position that's really uncomfortable for Conservative rebels, because they're all in the same side of the division. They're all in the same division of the lobby. Keir Starmer hates the bill and they love the bill, but it's not doing enough. And so actually that, I think, will be what saves Rishi Sunak at the end of the day. I was speaking to one cabinet minister who said, look, I think we're probably going to get it through with around 20. I don't think the bill is actually in danger. I think it's the wider perception that the right of the party think that theirs is the only version that will work, and the left of the parliament think it won't work at all, and Rishi's sort of stuck in the middle.
Well, the reason Sunak and the Whips are confident that they'll survive tonight is because ultimately what is on offer today is different to the proposition what was on offer yesterday. What was on offer yesterday was an improved version of the bill in the rebels' minds. That's why they voted for it. Today it's some version of the bill, albeit one that they think is imperfect, or no
nothing.
bill. Because if it goes down today at third reading, the whole Rwanda policy goes up in flames.
And you
There'll
look
be
bloody
nothing left.
stupid if that's
and you
what
look bloody
you really
stupid. And
care
Sunak's
about.
government might collapse.
Just before we leave Prime Minister's questions, I think it's worth hearing from Rishi Sunak as well. He had this whole stunt where he got slapped down by the Speaker for doing so, where he held up some article that Keir Starmer had penned some years ago when he was a human rights lawyer explaining human rights law, and how he had defended, I think, Hizb ut-Tahrir at a European court because he was a lawyer, and that's what lawyers do. They defend and they prosecute. And Rishi Sunak came up with this particular line about Starmer.
Just this week, Mr. Speaker, we had another example of the honourable gentleman doing one thing, saying another, because this week he backed the Home Secretary in banning the terrorist group Hizb ut-Tahrir, despite him personally using the European Court of Human Rights to try and stop them being banned. And don't take my word for it, Mr. Speaker, the extremist's own press release said, and I quote, the Hizb ut-Tahrir legal team led by Keir Starmer. Now, I know he doesn't like talking about them because they've been a client, but when I see a group chanting jihad on our streets, I ban them, he invoices them.
Within a second of Rishi Sunak delivering that line that I ban terrorist groups, you invoice them, it was a Conservative Party attack ad. And this is the flavour.
Nothing says spontaneity like a Conservative Party attack ad in the wings.
And you can just see that was cooked up in Downing Street when they were preparing for Prime Minister's questions. Prime Minister, you deliver that line, and we've got the artwork and everything ready to go as a new attack on Keir Starmer.
Well, it's even more stark, I would say, than that. I mean, the tweet actually says, are you a terrorist in need of legal advice? Better call Keir. I mean, that is a stark piece of political messaging. And, you know, it is just, we've talked about before about how this year is going to be. If you're hoping for kind of like lofty, elevated campaign, which is going to sort of appeal to the better angels of our nature, I suggest you look away for the next 10 to 11 months, because it ain't going to be like that. It is going to be dirty and personal on both sides. And, you know, we saw a taste of that with Labour last year. They did a similar thing with Sunak.
Well, yeah, I mean, can I just say that the young love Better Call Saul? I don't think that's such a bad ad in the sense that I think it will get a lot of
Bob
people...
Odenkirk.
Well, yes, there is something quite cult about the whole thing. And weirdly, the Keir Starmer campaign against Rishi was something that he decided to double down on because he actually decided it did work for him. And I think many in his team then decided, well, actually, given the inches and the column inches and the chatter, all the rest of it, they were thrilled with it, right?
So I wonder whether it does have impact. The fact that
just explain. This is where he basically said Rishi Sunak doesn't care if paedophiles go free and all the rest of it.
Yes, but I wonder whether the attack on Starmer does have that impact, in the sense that I think most people understand that if you are a lawyer, and everyone has a right of defence or whatever, and if you're a human rights lawyer, you defend and sometimes
if
you
you were a
prosecute.
surgeon and you operated on somebody who came into your care who was a terrorist, would they be going, oh, look at this lefty surgeon who repaired terror? You kind of do the job, right? You do the job. You don't ask questions. You are not political in that sense. I mean, I agree with you. I think it is slightly more difficult, which is why it was so interesting to see the Speaker on his feet straight away saying no props in here, right? Rishi Sunak reaching for a sort of pretty populist kind of, stunt, quite frankly, in the Commons, slapped down straight away.
Well, I'd say it's a taste of things to come, because CCHQ have previously tried to prosecute, if you like, Starmer's case or period work history while he was Director of Public Prosecutions, but now they think they've got this 20 years worth of even more fruitful kind of cases and casework and history in the period that he was a defence lawyer. So we're going to be hearing endlessly about all that sort of stuff. We should talk about the fact that Lee Anderson's gone. We were talking about it yesterday.
A nation mourns.
A nation mourns, and that he's no longer one of the deputy chairmen of the Conservative Party.
Guess who got the exclusive?
Oh, hang on.
Yeah, it's really
Was it us?
It wasn't us.
No.
BBC?
No.
No.
Oh, God, it must have been another
Channel 4?
network.
No.
Computer Weekly, they've been on a hell of a run.
Not this time.
No?
It was, in fact, GB News, who employs Lee Anderson.
Well, it's okay, though, because if you are working at CCHQ and concerned about the fact that you've lost Lee Anderson and your friend Clark Smith as well, you need not be too worried, because you have no fewer than 8 remaining deputy chairmen of the Conservative Party to plug the gap. So I shouldn't worry too much about the workload, which does sort
So
of...
instead, you're saying 2 a penny, Lee Anderson, as opposed to...
Yes, 8 a penny, 10 a penny. Yeah, well, I mean, and that's actually one of the problems with these jobs, and in a way why they've gone, is that the deputy chairman job, which sounds very grand, has basically ended up being sort of doled around to almost anybody who is sort of on the fringes of the party. Probably you don't want to bring them in as a minister, fully fledged minister, but you want to sort of try and keep them on a tiny bit of a leash, and that's what happened with Anderson, but inevitably he ran away from it.
I mean, funnily enough, just hours after we were talking to Charles Walker, who said, I do not understand how you can keep people on the government payroll who do not believe in the government's agenda. They think they're helping their own constituents. That's not how politics works. A divided party is how you lose. But I think the substance of why they went, essentially, was that they were backing amendments which would make it much harder for individual migrants to appeal on personal claims. And essentially, I think Lee is part of the small but possibly growing contingent in the Tory party who thinks the rule of law is a bit of a waste of time.
There is a policy aspect to this. We've discussed over the last 2 or 3 days where this leaves Rishi Sunak and, strengthened, weakened, what will happen with the latest chapter of the psychodrama of the Conservative Party, which is all well and good. But I do think that one of the things that is emerging of where the government is trying to placate the rebels is this suggestion that they are going to change the civil service code to update it so that government ministers will tell civil servants, you've got to break international law, and civil servants will have to accept it. And you can just see how awful and difficult a position it will put civil servants in when their code has been changed by a government that says, to get my Rwanda policy to work, we're going to ask you to just close your eyes and shut your ears to the fact that it might not be strictly legal what we're asking you to do. What an appalling situation to put our civil service in when they are impartial and are there to follow the rule of law.
Yeah, and if you're hearing a lot about Rule 39 orders, this is what it's all about. Rule 39 orders come from the European Court of Human Rights, which would block flights to Rwanda. The other thing they called a sort of pyjama claims, because they can happen right up to the last minute in the dead of night. Somebody might be sitting on a plane, as happened in June of 2022, when there were migrants who were actually sitting on the plane. The pyjama orders came, Rule 39 came, and it said you cannot take off. The plane couldn't take off. And this was the European Court of Human Rights. And this is why there are people who are in the Conservative Party, even in very, dare I say, prominent positions like Lee Anderson, who think that the European Court of Human Rights is just a roadblock, is just an obstacle.
A foreign court.
There was a very good, I have to say, our colleague Michelle Hussein did a very good interview this morning on Radio 4, in which the illegal immigration minister kept on talking about foreign courts as if they weren't actually courts that we had signed up to, rules that we had signed up to,
Michelle
international
said, no, they're
courts.
not foreign courts,
Stop
they're
calling them
international.
foreign courts, yeah.
The Prime Minister's been crystal clear that that he will not let a foreign court get in the way of this Rwanda policy. So the legislation is clear, the Prime Minister is clear, and I am clear. And we'll hear the details of that during the course of the debate this afternoon.
You know it's not a foreign court.
Well, the Strasbourg Court, the European Court of Human Rights, the Rule 39s that you've just been talking about.
It's an international court. Foreign means it belongs to another country. What other country does it belong to?
Well, it's a court that's based in Strasbourg.
It's an international court. It's not a French court, is it?
My point is this, Michelle. We have respected judges who are respected all over the world in this country, and it should be for ministers, it should be for the government to decide, not the Rule 39s that we've been seeing.
I mean, I think you're right to identify exactly that, which is this key question of the rule of law within the Conservative Party and the Conservative Party's relationship to the rule of law. This isn't the first time that we've encountered this. I mean, cast your mind back to the early days of the Boris Johnson premiership, where his government and Dominic Cummings, as then was, as one of his chief advisors, kept suggesting that the government would ignore the Benn Act. Seems like ancient history now, but this was an act that Parliament had passed to ensure that there would be a no-deal Brexit. Johnson kept hinting that the government might just not obey it. Then, if you remember back in 2020, 2021, there was the Internal Market Bill. This was effectively, then Minister Brandon Lewis accepted that this was the bill that would break international law in a limited way,
and
targeted
specific
and
way.
specific way. Yeah, limited and
so
and
only
specific
a teeny
way.
weeny bit,
just
of
a little
breaking the
bit.
law.
And
Yeah.
indeed, the question arose then about how civil servants would enact that and whether they would be instructed to break international law, and top civil servants had to weigh in. And here we are again. We heard Robert Jenrick there in the Commons yesterday saying that the law should be our servant and not our master. And I said yesterday that the Conservative Party is confused as to what conservatism means, or they have very different definitions of conservatism. This is one of the key fissures between them, which is that some Conservatives, particularly on the kind of One Nation wing of the party, say the rule of law and the protection of the rule of law as a key tenet of our constitution, that is what Conservatives are about.
It's literally the definition of conservatism, conserving our structures and our...
Totally. And then the other wing say that no, actually the rule of law is increasingly a kind of slightly effete construct. It often comes from abroad. So parliamentary sovereignty is what matters, and that the law, as Janet was referring to yesterday, should bend in all circumstances around that.
But if you are in the civil service and you are kind of the cabinet secretary or acting cabinet secretary, as is the case right now, and you just cast your mind forward about what this would mean in practical terms, you would have the situation where civil servants might be asked to do something that they consider unlawful as a result of a revised civil service code. They say they are not going to do it. And then you get the government saying, the reason our Rwanda policy isn't working is because of these bloody civil servants. And the civil servants become part of a party political dogfight because Rishi Sunak has decided to put all his chips on this Rwanda policy, which you keep doubling down. And it's like those commodity traders in the city who lose a bank £3 billion because they make one bad bet and then they make another bad bet and they keep making another bad bet. And I fear that is where Rishi Sunak is going with this policy, that you just keep rolling the dice and losing and you double down again and again.
I'd also say that ECHR has become a dog whistle to many of the Conservative Party. It's almost like something they would call woke. And I think there's a sense amongst, certainly Labour MPs, that it is extraordinary, as Lewis was saying, to hear a party talking about dispensing with international law and the very stuff that protects us. Because the ECHR doesn't just help migrants to get off planes, it empowers victims by requiring proper investigation into deaths apparent at the hands of the state or due to the negligence of state officials. Without that, we would not have uncovered the deaths at Hillsborough in a proper way. We would not have uncovered the John Warboys rapist victims. These are elements of the ECHR which the Conservative Party never actually discusses, the parts of the law which actually protect us. So you can't have it both ways. You can't say, the Strasbourg foreign laws that just prevent us from having sovereignty, and actually a law that helps people, victims of terrible crimes and terrible misdemeanours, sometimes by the state, to get redress.
Well, the thing is, the way I think in which these people are trying to have it both ways, in a way Sunak is sort of doing the same thing, which is you could say that maybe it is the case and this would be highly contested, but there are certainly people who think this, that the post-Second World War kind of international framework for dealing with refugees does need amending, it does need updating. And you can definitely have that argument. And there are European leaders and governments that would actually agree with that. Maloney would. Okay, she's on the sort of radical right, but there are others as well. Lots of countries are dealing with this. But in that case, what you have to do is do the hard yards.
Change the law.
And change the law. Have a negotiation. Get countries together, use goodwill, use diplomacy, and then all of these questions, or at least some of them, go away. What you can't do, which is what the people of the Andersons of the world and Jenrick as well, what you can't do is just stick in your head in the sand and pretend that these laws don't exist or that they don't matter.
I think
or
it's
that
more
Britain
than that.
isn't party to them, and it doesn't matter that Britain is seen to obey them, because there are costs if you don't do so.
Yeah.
There are trade-offs that so often these people just don't want to ever accept or engage with.
But I think you're so right. I don't think it's about sticking your head in the sand. I think it's having the fight visibly, right?
Yeah.
And the irony, of course, is if you look at what happened, they always talk about the Albania example as a way of bringing down migration from Albania. Why did that work? Because actually Eddie Rama and Rishi Sunak got together, they banged heads together, they got a deal. So instead of seeing this stuff as foreign bodies, literally in the sense of kind of bacteria, you should be doing those deals. You should be opening those conversations. You should be at the table. You should be looking at working with Calais, having whatever it takes in Calais to stop the small boats coming over, because that's how these deals are made. They're not made by us sitting here on our island and putting up a drawbridge, right?
But it's also the situation at the moment you've got, which is that there is an international problem that is crashing into an election timetable, and the Tories need to show something before the next election, because they have made such a huge song and dance about this, and Rwanda in particular, that what you're talking about, Lewis, about there being some kind of international agreement. Of course, it has to be done on a much bigger level than just the UK. But the UK is thinking, I've got to call an election soon. Now I've got to do something. I've got to do something.
Yeah,
and it's ill thought through.
Although just on that timetable point, I mean, this is the really the thing for me that I keep coming back to, is in terms of the political cost of all of this and the extent to which Sunak, as we saw displayed on the Commons floor today, ending up in the mire over it. We were told this was going to be the great trump card for the Conservatives. This was going to be the great dividing line. Instead, Starmer's walking all over him. And for what? Because if we think about the timetable now, let's assume this passes tonight, which we think it will, then that means that the earliest Lord's reading can be on the 29th of January. Then you have report stage. There's probably going to be amendments from the Lords, which means we'll end up in parliamentary ping-pong, which means that the Commons will have to send it back again and back and forth. So that probably takes you up to March. And then we heard this morning the Home Office Immigration Minister on the radio with Michelle, as we were saying, basically not committing to any timetable. She was suggesting, could it be 2 to 3 months? That would then take you into July, August, September. So we could be looking right before the election period, before any of this is operationalised, assuming even that it is. And I think just politically, again, it's crazy.
I mean, just as a postscript to it all, the president of Rwanda, Paul Kagame, has been sort of doorstepped by a couple of reporters. And he said, look, guys, if you can't sort this out, we're happy to give you your money back. Yeah. Frankly, this is your problem, not ours. And you just get the impression of President Kagame shaking his head and thinking, bloody
no
hell,
win, no fee.
What are you doing?
Yeah.
What are you doing in Britain?
It doesn't look great when we are beholden to a kind of war criminal.
Well, I know an American diplomat who works in Kigali who was just saying that they cannot believe the mess that Britain has got itself into with Kagame for more or less exactly the reason you describe. Because Paul Kagame has done some pretty unsavoury things around the world.
And we're the one now begging.
It's not a free and fair democracy.
Britain cannot say a bloody word about it because we are beholden to the Rwandan president to allow some of these people into the country.
I also think, from a public perspective, and I know this from people like really close to me who I was talking to last night, there is still a misconception about what the Rwanda policy is.
Yeah.
That people think it's just the processing that happens in
they
Rwanda.
do. Yeah.
So many people think it's just the processing that happens in Rwanda and that then they come back to the UK. They never, just to clarify, they will never set foot in the UK unless, weirdly, their cases are rejected.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think it's really important to clarify that, because when you hear Boris Johnson, for example, saying, we are setting the template for the rest of Europe, that is wrong. Germany, who is often cited as doing the same thing, is not doing the same thing. They are using a third country for the processing in order to then get the legitimate if you like, applications back in Germany. We're not offering that. And I think the fact that this is still so misunderstood is kind of part of the whole strategy that Rishi Sunak has been telling, right? It's just don't worry about that. Don't worry about that. Yeah.
We'll be back after the break. It's like we're going to have a new section on this podcast called Conflict Today.
Or what has Iran done now?
Because in the last couple of days, Iran has bombed Syria, Iraq, and has just fired off missiles into Pakistan, quite deliberately. It wasn't a mistake. They were targeting a terrorist group in a Baluchi militant group called Jaish al-Adl, and fired off missiles. They don't make any bones about it. Iranian state media said these bases were hit and destroyed by missiles and drones. And you just look at the map of the Middle East and you say Iranian proxies in Gaza, Hamas, in Lebanon, Hezbollah, in Yemen, in the Red Sea, with the Houthis firing on shipping that is trying to get to the Suez Canal, and now Iran itself firing into Iran, Iraq, and Pakistan being the first time it has been struck by Iranian missiles. And you are left with that question, what the hell is going on? And Iran, the regional superpower, flexing its muscles.
Yeah, it does. It is a bit of a it's all kicking off sort of moment. It feels like that anyway. It feels like from October the 7th, we have not stopped hearing about one conflict after another in that part of the world. And I think you used a very interesting word, which is proxy, because we always hear about Iran's proxy wars, don't we? Iran is fighting Russia, or Iran is fighting, X over Syria. It's a proxy war. This time round, they're very visible. They're not hiding behind another group. They're just going, yep, I'm putting my hands up here. It was us. And what happens now? Well, Pakistan has basically said that their drone strike was illegal and unacceptable, and there will be serious consequences. You don't want to hear nations that have nuclear weapons talking to other nations that have nuclear weapons, we think, about serious consequences, right?
Exactly. And also you've got the West saying, kind of with an increasing level of harumph, that we're losing our patience with you. We're getting Iran. You've got to stop this.
And stamping of the foot by Grant Shapps.
Yeah, a stamping of the foot, and you think, well, I wonder what does come next, because presumably it looks like Tehran is seeing how far it can go before the West does respond. But you see a map that is ever widening, where Iranian tentacles or missiles are landing.
Look, I think the West can sort of harumph and say whatever it wants, but I don't think we are in this conflict. I don't think we're being listened to at all. We're hearing that Pakistan is saying it reserves the right to respond to this illegal act. That sends a chill down your spine. And we know that the state that is right there in the middle of it is China. So suddenly China is in this kind of remarkable position of semi-authority saying, OK, you two, stop wrangling. Pakistan on one side, Iran on the left. They're the brokers in this. So I'm wondering really whether the West, certainly whether we have any particular part to play on this at all. But it does sound as if there is going to be retaliation of some kind from Pakistan. And I'm not sure that they're going to listen to what we say next.
It's also the time-honoured principle that it's easier to start these things than to stop them. Yeah. And that, you respond and there may be a miscalculation. It's not all just, look, I'm going to slap you on the wrists and then you slap me on the wrists and we'll call it quits. You don't know. And it just adds to the sense of uncertainty that we feel in the world, and sense of danger, I think, and that's not over kind of using the word, the sense of danger we all feel since October the 7th, of where does this go next?
And I think we are seeing it in terms of borders and countries. Iran would say, actually, this is about tribal Islam differences. So Jaish al-Adl, or the Army of Justice as it's called, is a Sunni group. It's a militant group. It was founded a decade ago or so, and that wants to sort of spread its sort of tentacles across Afghanistan, Iran and Pakistan. Clearly what we do know, what we repeatedly know about Iran, is it is the sort of Shia wing of Islam which wants to keep the Shia groupings in power. So I think you have to see this as an intra-Islamic war, but actually when it's played out across countries and boundaries, then it doesn't seem to be confined at all.
it may not be containable.
Yeah.
And that is the danger of where we are right now. Well, let's talk to Behnam Ben Taleblu. He's the senior fellow focused on Iranian security at the Foundation for the Defence of Democracies, and that's a think tank based in Washington. And Behnam, thanks so much for joining us. It's a simple question, but probably very complicated. What on earth is going on?
This is the first ever reported Iranian joint drone and missile strike against Pakistan. The Iranian official reason is that they are bombing targets affiliated with the terrorist group Jaish al-Adl, which is a front group for a Sunni Baluch group known as Jondola. Even the U.S. State Department has designated this entity as a foreign terrorist organization. Iran has faced something of a low-level ethno-sectarian insurgency on its southeastern border with Pakistan, which also does have a Baluch population. But Iran has also long used the pretext of this insurgency for harsher relations between the center and the periphery, leading to rounds of protests in southeastern Iran as well.
Is this a flexing of the Iranian muscle? And if so, why is it happening now?
It most certainly is. And I do think there is linkage, even though they are striking different targets in Syria, Iraq, and now in Pakistan. For the first time ever, the day before was the first joint Iranian attack on Syria and Iraq. In Syria, they claim to be responding to ISIS-K, which is ironically to Iran's east, but Iran struck towards its west,
Right.
in response to the terror attack at the funeral ceremony on the 4th anniversary of the killing of Qasem Soleimani, Iran's chief terrorist mastermind. ISIS took credit for that attack. Then there was Iranian strikes in northern Iraq, in Erbil, actually, that actually targeted Kurdish civilians. That Iran claimed were houses of or housing, Mossad or Israeli agents. So in all of these operations, Iran is using ballistic missiles. Iran has long had ballistic missiles. It's had the largest ballistic missile arsenal in the Middle East, actually, and they're moving now to produce more qualitatively militarily capable systems, more precise systems. And the more precise these systems, the more, again, I think the threshold for their use will drop, meaning we can see more attacks, not less, in an already volatile Middle East.
I mean, we have seen here in the UK some huffing and puffing by our Defence Secretary saying that we're losing our patience with Iran. Iran is really flexing its muscles, isn't it? If you look at kind of what's happening in the Red Sea, what's happening with Hezbollah in Lebanon, what's happening with the Hamas in Gaza, and now Iran taking action against Syria, Iraq, Pakistan. Is the West losing patience? And what is the West going to do, if anything?
That's the ultimate question, because the West has actually, as you mentioned, long hemmed and hawed about this kind of expansionist Iranian activity in the region. The problem is, in word and in deed, the West has actually shown greater restraint in the face of these sorts of activities. This is not the first time, for instance, Iran has used drones or missiles. If you remember, in summer 2021, for instance, Iran killed a UK national and a Romanian national with the same drone that it ultimately ended up giving to Russia the year later. In September 2022, for the first time ever, Iran actually killed a U.S. citizen with a close-range ballistic missile in strikes on northern Iraq. There have actually been 8 such ballistic missile operations from Iranian territory since 2017. None have been met with any kind of forceful U.S. Or U.K. kinetic action. Yeah. And in the limited times there have been strikes against the proxies after lots and lots and lots of rhetorical pleas to stop this activity.
Are you concerned about the escalation now? Because it all seems to be happening so quickly.
I am concerned for the prospects of escalation. It just depends in what theater. The U.S. just recently struck the Houthis. This is actually the third time the U.S. has used force. Had they used force in conjunction with partners like the U.K. earlier and more decisively, perhaps we wouldn't have gotten here. But thus, we are where we are. The Houthis may take it upon themselves, that's the Iran-backed rebel group in Yemen, to strike at Saudi Arabia and violate a ceasefire they've had that many in the West want to hold together with spit and gum and glue. That's one vector. The other is the Israel-Lebanon border, which there's a new normal there every single day. The rules of deterrence are getting rewritten. And if that war really kicks off, because don't forget, you have over 100,000 displaced Israelis in the north, and there are still rocket attacks from Hezbollah against Israel, even though it's a Hamas-Israel war. So even though the main theater is the south, that is a proxy Iran cares a heck of a lot more about. and may want to more directly intervene to save.
Benham, fantastic to speak to you. Thank you so much.
Pleasure. Thank you so much.
Yesterday, you might remember that in our discussion about boundaries and Buckinghamshire and John Bercow, a lot of bees. We also mentioned the dolphin flipper. Well, that was not the end of the flipper.
What, you mean this story's got another twist?
Another flip.
Hello, the newsagents. My name is Richard Jones. I was Flipper, the dolphin, chasing Bercow and Farage for the 2010 election. For Farage, I dressed as a kipper with a tie, done up like a kipper. It was quite hard to hide behind doors and fence posts, dressed as Flipper, to make the important surprise photobombs. The costume's feet were quite big, and there was a high possibility of stumbling onto the targeted candidates. And now I'm wondering, should I come out of retirement for round 2? And if so, where would Farage be standing?
Oh my God, this is one for our listeners, really.
I'm strongly worried that some of our listeners will believe that they've forgotten to take their medication this afternoon, having listened to you singing in Spanish and then hearing from someone called Flipper
but that is the joy of a UK general election.
That is
Who
truly.
could forget? Who could forget the dark night that was? What was his name?
Well, you. So it sounds like you could forget him. Yeah. You answered your own question.
Oh, the monster raving loony party.
No, but who was the guy? You know, the Count Binface.
Oh, Count Binface.
Count
Yes,
Binface,
who actually ended up beating, and he beat Lawrence Fox in the London mayoral elections. Apologies,
Look,
Lawrence.
it is an absolute part of the joy of British public life. The gaiety of it. We've talked this week about what's been happening in Iowa. I mean, Iowa, it's kind of politics, it's relentless, it's slick, it's advertising. There is something wonderful about the stunts that take place in UK general elections that would just, if you were in France or Germany or the US, you'd think everyone's going to start raving mad. And I just absolutely love it.
I mean,
love covering
do yourself
those
a favour and look at I think it was 2017 election with Count Binface standing next to Theresa May in the Maidenhead count at about 5 a.m.
She's just lost her majority. She's standing on stage with a massive bin.
She's standing next to a man with a bin on his head. It's phenomenal. So I return to my question for Flipper. Where should Flipper stand?
Clacton.
So it's going to be
Clacton.
Clacton. Clacton on the sea, bit of Essex, nice beach.
Yeah.
Head down there, or is there anyone else that you think Flipper should be
it's got to be a coastal
against?
sea, obviously. I mean, you can't be standing in Herefordshire.
Yeah, no, you couldn't breathe if you.
No, quite.
Actually, no, he was a kipper.
Oh, yeah, I suppose that's true. So maybe Arbroath smoking. But I remember talking about like the monster raving loony and stuff. I remember I can't remember what it was I think it was the Brecon and Radnorshire by-election, and their candidate was called the Pink Lady. And she spent the whole evening going around the sort of gymnasium, in this sort of like random little bit of Powys, giving out Pink Lady apples to absolutely everybody. It was lovely. I think she only got 34 votes, but she should have got more as far as I was concerned after that.
Yeah,
Pink Lady at 3 o'clock in the morning.
As we mentioned on the US episode yesterday, Nikki Haley took £37 million in donor money to spend in Iowa. She got 22,000 votes, which works out at roughly $1,755.
And it was about the same for
So who's the mad one? Pink Lady or Nikki Haley?
Exactly.
That's our question for today.
We'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Bye.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.